Nigeria's tech ecosystem has experienced explosive growth over the past decade. The TLP Advisory report delved into the factors driving this transformation. We'll be looking at that anyway, including government policies, investor interest, and a burgeoning entrepreneurial spirit. So this morning, we will take a look at the challenges and opportunities and how that can help, Nigerian startups to scale over those hurdles and find fundings amidst constraints and infrastructural challenges or limitations, so to speak. We know that there's a potential when you look at these emerging technologies, but then there are challenges that need to be dealt with. And so by analyzing past successes and, of course, failures, we offer insights on the show into the future of Nigeria's tech landscape. And to help us do that, I have Aloaye Daniel, Senior Associate and Head of Compliance, TLP Advisory. Thank you so much. I don't know if I should call you Aloaye or Daniel.
Daniel is fine. Daniel is perfectly fine.
All right, it's nice to have you around on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, so of course, Nigeria's venture capital investments peaked around $3 billion as we tracked in 2021. That actually showcased some sort of rapid growth in the tech ecosystem between then and now. So how has the venture ecosystem evolved over the past decade? When you look at the milestones, when you look at the challenges, and when you look at the opportunities, have we fared?
So when you connect the dots backwards, the buzzword for the last 10 years has been growth. There has been so much growth in the venture ecosystem. We've seen the emergence of multiple unicorns. As far back as 2 weeks ago, we had a new unicorn emerge onto the scene. So there's been so much growth in the last 10 years. So you see, we've had a lot of innovative and disruptive thinking, actually disrupting business models across multiple verticals, from banking to pharmaceutical to logistics. But there have been so many startups which have emerged from the woodwork, and this has actually coincided with us also having regulation, which has risen to actually regulate and create relevant structures for these businesses to operate in. So it has been a very interesting time. The last decade has been really interesting, both on the funding side as well as the founder side. So when you connect the dots backwards, you see that there has been so much growth. Of course, we've had the emergence of multiple, not just unicorns, but really valuable businesses serving the needs of Nigerians, as well as the global market. We've also seen some businesses go belly up. We've seen the influx of a lot of capital into Nigerian markets. We've seen exits. But when you look at everything on the large scale, you see that there has been so much growth, and the highlights actually eclipse the lowlights. So it has been a very good and interesting time to event.
Okay, so you talked about policies of governments, and I'd like to focus on that. I'm very keen to look at the policies and the regulations that the government has brought into that space for a couple of years now, 4 years down the line. Do you think those policies have actually helped? Because we know that in some other climes, other business climes, we've heard about policy somersaults, we've heard about regulations that are not favorable. But then when you look at the fintech industry, so to speak, have those policies or regulations helped?
So that's a really interesting question, to be honest. So I like to see compliance. So globally, we see innovation is pursued by regulation. So for me, I like to look at it from this angle. When regulation catches up to innovation, what does it do? Does it cripple it or does it enable it? Now, in Nigeria, we've had a number of regulations come onto the scene. In the last 10 years, like I had mentioned previously, we've had regulation coincide with a lot of innovative thinking. Now, what is regulation done when it comes onto the scene? Does it enable it or does it cripple it? Is it a stumbling block or is it a crutch leading them upwards? Now, for a lot of businesses, compliance, it's a low-hanging fruit, but it can also be the fruit of the poison tree. So now we have to ask ourselves, when we look at regulation, in the last 2 years, we've had the Startup Act, which we had worked on at TLP Advisory, one of the firms which worked on that, the Startup Act. We also had multiple CBN regulations, which in more ways than one are focused on fintechs. We've also had a new Companies and Allied Matters Act, which is now more tailored to the needs of smaller size and single director and shareholder structured businesses. So when you look at it, you can really not tell the story of the startup ecosystem without actually talking about regulation. Now, of course, we will say regulation is the elephant in the room. Some people say it's the entire room, to be honest. So when you look at it, you have to ask ourselves, we would have gotten to this point without regulation actually existing. Now, regulation, you could have done so much more, but has done a lot. When you look at the Startup Act, for instance, you have startup labeling, you have a startup investment fund, which was, I think it came into being in March, Q1 2023. It's over £500 million already existing for startups to actually access, but it's more of a what is not on the table and what's on the table. So there's so much potential. Now, we cannot deny the fact that compliance and regulation has gotten us to a large point, but it's now, how can we go from point B, where we are now, to point C, and then all the way to point Z? So it's an ongoing conversation, but we cannot deny the fact that in the last 10 years, we've had a lot of relevant innovation that has been powered by regulation.
Okay, and we also understand there's the CBN's regulatory sandbox too. And that has helped in a way.
That
Would you
has
like to
really
say something
helped,
about that?
Yes, that has really helped because it has helped a lot of CBN-focused startups actually walk the thin line between innovation and regulation. There's been lots of regulatory hand-holding by the CBN. Of course, not the CBN is one of the more prominent regulators. So the CBN has really helped startups to come to understand financial services and payments and how best to avoid any form of disruptions without their business models going belly up.
Okay. Okay. All right. Noted. So, but then, according, you said it's been growth all the way. It's looking good. The conversations and the trajectory is looking really beautiful and fantastic. But then, according to reports, we hear that about 51% of these startups are actually finding it hard to secure funds due to currency volatility, and of course, limited access to investors, so to speak. So I'd like to find out if there are innovative solutions that can help, these startups deal with those encumbrances and how to open up their vista and attract the kind of funds that can help them scale up operation and size.
Oh yes, that's another very interesting question. Now, you know how globally capital is the lifeblood of any business and the global economy, of course. Now, for Nigeria, for startups generally, funding is really important. Now, of course, when you look at the number of startups we have in Nigeria and number of bulletproof ideas we have in the room, of course, access to funding quickly becomes a knife fight in the prison yard. Now, in the last few years, we've had a funding winter, for lack of a better word, post-COVID. The post-COVID funding winter, we have had very conservative move by investors seeking to actually fund businesses. Now, this has made the number of startups and founders actually go back to their thinking box and ask, how best do we address the situation? If we don't have external funding, how can we raise the capital we need to run our businesses? Now, in the midst of this teaching moment, a very important question I think has actually emerged is, okay, we are seeking to provide solutions to a market now, and there are gaps in the market, but is there a market in the gap? That's the actual question. So if you are seeking to create a product for a market, is there an addressable market that can actually service viably and raise profit? At the end of the day, profit making is the end game of most businesses. Yeah. So there's been so much innovative thinking, very imaginative thinking. You've had businesses go from just servicing the local market to actually going global, because there's only so much you can provide for the local market when you provide certain services. And there's a global market out there. It's like an ocean and a lake. It's easier when you're on the ocean because you can service a global market than just plain small in the Nigerian economy. So we've had more innovative thinking. We have had a number of verticals go from just being based in Nigeria to going global. We can name names all day, but we don't have all day to go back. So yeah.
So I guess that's actually, encouraging investors to want to, looking at the potential that we have in our, domestic line, for investors to want to really, put their money or plug their money into these startups. I want to believe.
Yes, that's been very good, because investors, they always vote to their pocket. Yeah. When they see innovative thinking and really creative solutions by founders, they are willing to fund and say, okay, yeah, we have this innovative thinking. We see that you are willing to think independently, even sans investment. So yeah, we are willing to fund this, and it has really helped. Although we're having a funding winter, of course, we are coming back into a funding summer. There's a lot more capital coming to the market now. So it's a really interesting time. The last 10 years have been interesting, and I can't wait to see how the next 10 will be. Probably much more interesting than the last 10 years have been.
But we've seen, most of these investors demanding regular updates from these startups. That calls to question the level of trust between the funders and the founders. And of course, an issue around transparency and accountability, because it's not enough to secure funds, but then how do you expend the funds, and how are we so sure that these funds are being used by the startups to scale up the business pitch that is presented to the investors, so to speak? So when you look at, the issue around communication between investors, that is the funders, and the founders or the startups, do you think it is cordial? And does it brew trust between both entities?
Oh, yeah. My favorite thing about the report is how data-driven it is. It's really data-driven. And if you look through the report, there's a part that actually talks about communication between founders and funders. So in recent years, it has really, really improved. Of course, we've had the issue of founder mistrust, founder breach of confidence, and a number of other concerns. And
mismanagement of funds.
Of course, definitely. There's also mismanagement of funds, but that is more of a low light than a highlight. We've had more founders actually being more trustworthy than those who have committed founder fraud. But that being said, so now we have more startups and more entities being willing to have that communication handshake with their investors and actually keep them updated. We have the number of startups, not just because of their investment documents, but just generally being willing to actually inform their investors of what the updates are what the gray areas are, what their Achilles heels are, where the business is currently, what products they are developing. We've had startups even going beyond regular updates, actually publishing newsletters and sending this on a bi-weekly or a bi-monthly basis to not just the investors but the general market, actually helping to improve the quality, because now pretty much everyone has a finger on the pulse of these startups. So that has been a really, really great improvement. And when you look, now going back to the report talks about the fact that in the last 5 years, we've had huge investment in communication by startups. They're now more willing to actually inform.
Give
I
information.
think we have upwards of, if I remember correctly, 75% of startups now being more willing to actually inform their investors and general market of what is really going on.
Okay, so aside having to secure funds and building or scaling up operations, of course you agree with me that one other area that's important for us to talk about for startups is acquisition of talent, because that's actually what will help to drive the growth plan of these startups. So when it comes to acquiring talent, is it challenging in terms of skills, either match or mismatch, having the right hands to drive the set of goals that these startups are willing to have achieved within a possible course of time? So, of course, we have a competitive market both locally and globally. So when it comes to getting this kind of talents, has it been easy? Has it been rosy?
So there's really no cut and dried answer to that question. Now, the same barriers to entry that have been lowered that have actually allowed Nigerian startups go to market are the same barriers that have been lowered that have allowed the Nigerian workforce actually become more globally attractive. So startups are very much aware and alive to this concern, because you have a lot of employee migration, not just in the domestic market, but also globally. Now, startups, when you go to the report, the number of startups, they are now being more oriented towards focusing on company culture. Now, from my side of defense, of course, it's a law side of defense. The contracts are a bit more competitive. You have companies now willing to invest more. Of course, they have always been willing to invest more, but when you have such a critically competent workforce as you have in Nigeria, because the emergence of startups in Nigeria has actually coincided with the emergence of a very, very competent workforce, not just in the tech space, but also generally, legal space and a bunch of other spaces as well, across verticals. You have a very competent workforce. Now, this workforce, if they don't work for Nigerian employers, they will work somewhere else. Now, these startups, they are willing to actually invest more in talent acquisition and retention. Then when you go to the report, see that it's one of the 4 drivers of business strategy for these startups, actually acquiring and then also retaining talent.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Aloaye Daniel, Senior Associate and Head of Compliance, TLP Advisory. It was nice talking to you.
It was really nice speaking to you as well.
And we actually hope startups are able to scale the hurdles around poor logistics, power supply, because I know that that's another challenge, and key infrastructural challenges. Those are issues too. And by the time they get these funds and get advice, they'll be able to come up with innovations that can make them self-sufficient in that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for your time.